What we're going to be looking at is some notes for you on the structure for your 6 weeks paper that you're going to be doing on a separate piece. The structure itself goes by several different names, but one of the ones you'll hear a lot of common is a funnel and reverse structure for your essays. When you're doing this structure, what you're looking for is to start your paper off with some kind of an attention getter. That's kind of common in every one of your essays, but you're looking for a very broad beginning this time. Now, on your first couple of papers, it's probably a good idea if you ask a question to start your paper off. By asking this question, you're giving yourself a very, very specific target for the remainder of your paper, and that you're going to be trying to answer that question, and it'd be a good way for you to go back and check your information. Because if you go through the paper and at the end of the first paragraph, you have not answered your question or not written a thesis statement that answers your question, then you'll have a problem not only with your attention getter, but with your points that you're trying to prove in your paper. So for the first 2 6 weeks papers, my suggestion would be to come up with a good question to ask. And we'll look at some examples here in just a minute. As you go through this attention getter process, keep in mind that whenever you ask a question like this, it'll be answered again at the end of the first paragraph, and it'll also be answered again at the very end of your paper. And you want to have all of your main points connecting back to this question and therefore attached to your thesis statement as well. Once you have the attention getter out of the way, this is going to take you through a structure of each of the sentences, by the way, for your paragraphs. Your second sentence, or it may be your third sentence if you have a very long question or I have to introduce that in some way. Normally this is your second sentence, is a general statement of some kind of a fact or maybe a little bit further explanation of your question that you opened up with. The idea is you want to begin narrowing down your ideas just a bit, and it probably is going to be related to your question at the start. Maybe if you're doing separate piece and you are talking about war, maybe you've asked a question something like, are there different kinds of wars that people can experience? Your second statement might be something like an example from the story, or it might be something that is maybe one of the types of war is more devastating than the other. But you want to take it from the general statement and make it a little bit more narrow as you come from down the question. And then as you go through this paragraph, this second sentence will be a little narrower than the first, then your third sentence will be more narrow than the second, and eventually by the time you get to the end of the first paragraph, which will be 4 to 6 sentences, you'll be narrowed down completely to your thesis statement. But once again, you are looking back at your question and looking to answer that and provide more specific information than what you did at the beginning. On your third sentence, you're looking to introduce a section of your thesis's main idea. Now in that part, you're going to highlight the strongest point in the body of your paper. So at this point, you need to have an idea of what your 3 main points are going to be when you're writing your 6 weeks paper. If you've chosen well and you've gotten some good articles and good information, you probably have an idea of what 3 things you want to prove. Once again, if you're doing the quotes section on the separate piece topics, that'll be very easy, as your 3 main points will be the 3 quotes you've selected. Or if you chose the character flaws section, obviously you're going to be describing the 3 character flaws for one of those particular characters. But of those 3, one of them is going to be the one that should stand out to you the most, as having either the most information or the highest quality information, and the one that relates most directly to your question and your thesis statement. What we're looking for here in this third sentence is you're giving off a very early hint as to where you're going to go with that main point and how that's going to be developed in your paper. Now, since you'll see in a minute where that main point is going to be located in your paper, knowing that you're going to give your audience a chance to get a preview of the paper this early on is key to the success of how your paper will be graded. If a reader gets lost here, or a grader gets lost, or a peer review person gets lost at this point, it makes the paper seem more confusing than perhaps what it really is. On your fourth sentence, you're going to have the importance of your ideas illustrated or explained. Now, this may be optional at this point. You may have to add an extra sentence along with this one. So maybe your fourth and your fifth sentence become your explanations of the importance of your ideas. Now, once again, you're looking at about a 4 to 6 sentence paragraph. So at this point, you're on sentence number 4. You may have to expand it all the way to 5 or 6 at this particular point, and maybe have a 7 or 8 sentence paragraph, which ends up in your thesis. What that's going to depend upon is how complex your topic is and how detailed your thesis statement is going to be. Now, obviously, you haven't written your thesis statement at this point, but you have a general idea of what 3 things you're going to be proving in the paper. If you think it's going to be fairly easy or fairly simple to outline, like the quotes, or perhaps themes, maybe even the character flaws one would fall into this category, you might be able to get away with this 1 or possibly 2 sentences at this point. But you need to ask yourself the question, how much do I need to explain without getting into a lot of details? It's also possible you may throw in an example here from the novel, since you are using the novel on your works cited list, a good chance to explain how it fits into the story at this particular point in time. Just keep in mind the more complex you're going to be, the more explanation and or introduction that you're going to need to do at this point so that the readers don't get lost with your paper. What you're headed to is the thesis statement. Now, this is the most important sentence of your entire opening paragraph, and it always will be the closing sentence of your opening paragraph. It's what I look for as an instructor when I'm grading the paper to see what you're going to be telling me early on at this particular point. 2 things I look for and things that I comment most of the time on would be your thesis being narrow and being focused. You saw in the beginning of the diagram how it's kind of like a funnel at the top, where the narrow stuff is at the very bottom of the funnel. Now you've narrowed down from a grand opening question that was very broad and could be answered several ways to a very structured, very focused point or a group of 3 points that you're trying to make. The term you'll hear occasionally in MLA is to think of this as being tri-structured, like 3 levels, 3 tiers. It's like an outline of your 3 main points all put together in one sentence. Now, this may be a tricky sentence for some people to write because it will be, at times, a long sentence, and it's not one that is easy to put together. But the main ideas you're looking for is a format or some kind of formula to use. So therefore, I've included 2 of those on this one particular point. In the spring, when you do your research paper, the kind of sentence you're going to write is that this is going to be the case, or so-and-so will be your case. What you're trying to prove or argue is the case or not the case, because you're going to choose a pro or con side, and then you're going to list your 3 main points at the end. So maybe in the research paper you say the death penalty should be outlawed in all states because, and then you list 3 reasons because of that. In your 6 weeks paper, though, it might be a little bit different. You're not exactly taking a persuasive statement in this particular time, so you may have a statement of a fact or a point that you're trying to prove, such as there are many kinds of wars in a separate piece, or Leper is the character with the most involved dark side to him, and then you list 3 reasons along with that. Now, somewhere in there, in this particular sentence, there are rare cases where an example might need to be fit in, and your thesis, though, can still only be the 1 sentence long, so be careful trying to mention examples. Maybe you say something like, as seen with Gene in the scenes where he is diving off the tree, it is obvious that characters have this particular trait because, and you list 3 reasons for that. So there is a way to do that with examples, but it does get a little bit more complicated. Remember the key words here: narrow, focused, right to the point, and it's got 3 levels to it, and all 3 of those levels will be explored in the body of the paper. Now we have a sample that we can look at here, and I'll try to blow this one up for you so that it's a little bit easier to read. Now this is a sample of an unrelated topic, and of course it has to deal with cats. And what I've done is made some comments off to the side of showing how this particular formula works. Now as you start writing your own paragraphs, you'll be thinking about that formula very detailed wise the first couple of times you do this. Eventually it'll kind of be second nature for you, but you want to keep in mind the first attempt is going to be your roughest rough draft. And so you're going to have to make revisions, and you're going to want to maybe even label the sentences like they are here on this screen for your opening paragraph. Now for the attention getter here, there was a question that was asked. What is it about cats that makes them so incredibly adorable to some people while others are deathly afraid of these animals? Now, at that particular point, you've asked a question that the reader may in his own mind try to answer. That's what you want from the reader at this point. You want to get them to start thinking about what you're generally going to be talking about. However, it goes to the general statement next. And it says, in this case, there were 2 sentences needed to be fit together to make it more sense. To some people, animals provide a necessary companion, to help them through life and to make everyday existence more enjoyable. Others, though, do not see the need for such companionship and actually work to avoid contact with animals. Those two sentences need to be put together because there is a two-sided issue being discussed in the opening paragraph. So there was a need for some expansion there. The next sentence right below that introduces the main section of my thesis. Since we're going to be talking about the different kinds of things that go into these relationships with animals in the paragraph, there was a need to show that early on in the paragraph. These quite different but real relationships with animals are often based upon childhood experiences, either good or bad. So in that one sentence, and especially at the very end, I let the readers know that the good and or bad side of this will be discussed throughout the paper, and that there's obviously some kind of connection between the relationship someone has with an animal and the experiences they had growing up. Following behind that, there were some more details to expand upon that. This is while some children grow up in an environment filled with love and affection toward animals, others have not had the same experience. More likely, though, these people experienced a negative situation with an animal and therefore have a fear of them. So in that one or two extra sentences, even though my paragraph has gotten a little bit longer now, it does narrow it down even further. So if you do go away from the formula, the strictly formula sentence by sentence by sentence, and you start adding things in, it's perfectly fine to do that as long as you are making them more and more specific with each sentence that you write. Now look at the end of this. This is the thesis statement. What you're looking for is a more narrow and focused statement with three things that are going to be discussed in the paper. The thesis statement reads, "This being the case, it is easy to determine that individuals base their relationships with animals upon previous experiences, their current proximity to animals, and personal attitudes that have been developed through life." So if you look at the way that the part that is highlighted, you'll see the three main points. The strongest point in here is going to be talking about previous experiences with animals as being the primary source of someone's attitude toward a current animal. The second main point being that they have, wherever they are currently located with animals, do they have a lot of animals around them, could affect their attitudes. And then the third point being the personal attitude that they develop through all of their life experiences in general will also help develop or hinder the development of those relationships with animals. So that paragraph is a good example of how things will work and lead into the body of the paper. Now, since you're only working on the opening and closing paragraph of the paper at this point, I won't spend much time here, but I do want you to look at these three things. This is the order that you're going to write your paper in, as far as the second, third, and fourth paragraphs of your paper. Remember, each of the paragraphs needs to be at least 4 sentences long. I would recommend that you try to get to about 5, 6, or 7 sentences, and maybe even more if you're going to throw in examples along the way. The key is you want to list your strongest point first, and that's also going to show up first in your thesis statement. The third paragraph will have your weakest point, and then you have the fourth paragraph being your second strongest point in the paper. So strongest point first, weakest point second, and then your second strongest point last. You can almost think about it as the strongest being A, the weakest being a C, and the second strongest being a B. Now the reason you bury that weakest point in the middle is that weakest point is probably going to be your shortest paragraph. It may have the least amount of quality information attached with it, and if someone reads the paper and they come to that point, you would not want that to be the first or the last thing they remember as they read through your topic. And so you kind of bury that one in the middle and hope they almost don't notice it as much. And if it's a very strongly organized paper, people will read the weakest point and actually see that it does fit, and they won't recognize that it's the weakest point of your three. That would be the ultimate success for your paper at that point. Going into your conclusion paragraph, the first thing you're going to want to do is to restate your thesis. Now, this is not necessarily a cut and paste, word for word, let me just chop the thesis from the first paragraph and put it down in the opening part of the last paragraph. Your idea here is to restructure it, but you want to keep all three main ideas. You want to keep them in the same order you had on the thesis statement, and they have to be accurate all the way through. Now, sometimes in a simple paper, one of the more simple topics, you might be able to come very, very close to a cut and paste, but you're going to still need to restructure it just a little bit so that the wording is not exactly the same as it was in the first paragraph. Here's a good example of how that opening thesis statement that we saw on the document a minute ago could have been reworded. This is the example of the restatement of the thesis. This being the case, it is easy to determine that individuals base their relationships with animals upon previous experiences, their current proximity to animals, and personal attitudes that have been developed through life. So the three main points are still there. They're all in the same order. All that's been changed is the introduction part of the sentence. Since you're into a conclusion paragraph, you could have also said something like, in conclusion, it is easy to determine that individuals base their relationships with animals, and go on from there. The key is you want to make a clear transition from the end of your third point into your conclusion paragraph. And also by restating your thesis, you're reminding the readers exactly what you said. So it's kind of like the old adage in a speech class where if you're giving a speech to a class, tell me what you're going to tell me the stuff, and then once again, tell me what you told me when you get down to the end. You can't always rely on the fact that when someone reads a paper, they come down to the last paragraph and say, hey, it's the last paragraph. It's going to be over. This must be their conclusion. Sometimes you have to remind them by restating your ideas very clearly. And that's one of the things I'll be looking for going through the grading process. The second sentence in your conclusion paragraph is probably going to be the most important one for you as a writer. It's the one that's going to cause you a little bit of difficulty because you're going to be showing once again the importance of the ideas, and you're going to summarize your resolution of the topic, the problem, or the ideas you presented into your paper. Now, if you looked at the opening paragraph, this is the step right before your thesis. So in that reverse format, getting from a specific restatement of your thesis to a more broad statement, we're now working in reverse. So it is the first step in this reversal process, which is why you call it the funnel and reverse structure. What you want to do here is pick one of your main points of your thesis and you want to explain it again. Most of the time, it is your strongest point. Sometimes, though, it may be your second strongest point if there's a high quality source or high quality piece of information that you need to repeat at that time. The idea is spend some extra time on this second sentence of your conclusion paragraph, and you'll see an example here in a minute of how this can work. In the third sentence of your final paragraph, you're going to have a summary of your strongest point, and also you're going to show how you dealt with that strongest point in the paper. Now you have to keep track of what you've done in the previous sentence, the second sentence of the conclusion paragraph. If you did pick your strongest point and resolved your summary or summarized your resolution in that previous sentence, then you need to pick something else. Or this could be an extension of the previous sentence. It may be you need 2 or 3 sentences to get that strongest point summarized, and that's perfectly fine if the strongest point is indeed one of the strongest ones you have. Now, in this part here, if you haven't explained it at this point, you do have to go back and mention some of the information you talked about in the body of your paper. An example here could be a good idea. Parts of a quote could be a good idea. Items that you discussed in great detail, perhaps in that second paragraph of your paper, need to be restated. You're trying to remind the reader of the strongest points so they go away feeling as if they understand your argument or they agree with your discussion or your point of view in your paper. If this strongest point, once again, needs some extra time, you can do that. This could be your third, fourth, fifth sentence as well. It is an optional section as you're putting this formula together and you're outlining this on your paper. And you want to use this once again if you have a multi-level topic or one that is quite complicated. The themes example, or the themes topic could be a good example of this, that some of the themes can get pretty deep and you may need to explain them a little bit more completely as it goes through. So if that's the case, feel free to add that fourth or fifth sentence at this point, and that may be where you are, making sure that things are well explained. What you have to be careful of here is you don't ever want to add anything new into your final paragraph. Don't add new information, don't add new arguments, don't add new points. You only have the 3 that you explained in the body of your paper that you need to rely on. There's a response to your attention getter. Here you've reached the final sentence of your paragraph. It is the final sentence of your paper. Most of the time it is 1 sentence. It sometimes can be 2, but you want to remember you started with a question. and you have to end with a question. So in your first couple of 6 weeks, you're going to look at the shape of your opening of your paper, which is normally a question, and go back to it. So since we've started with one, you must provide an answer for that paper, for that question in your closing of the paper. The idea is you've worked all the way back out to a more general statement. You started in the closing paragraph with a very specific restatement of your thesis. Now you've gone a little bit broader, explained a little bit more, and now you're backed all the way out, fully reversed to that closing sentence of your paper. Take one example here again. This is that same opening paragraph, and we will zoom in on it a little bit here and have it looked at the closing paragraph. Okay, a restatement of your thesis comes first at this point, and this is the same restatement we saw on the presentation just a moment ago. It says, this being the case, it is easy to determine that individuals base their relationships with animals upon previous experiences, their current proximity to animals, and personal attitudes that have been developed through life. So all three of the main points are there. It restates the thesis quite clearly. The resolution summary goes through with, it looks like it's one extra sentence at this point, and then there's a second sentence right behind that adding extra information on top of that. It says if one can identify specific personal experiences with animals and examine them from the standpoint of if they were positive or negative, one can make progress in determining the success or failure of future relationships with animals. Further study may reveal that those who are keeping increased distance between themselves and animals are the ones who have had negative experiences in the past or currently have negative attitudes toward animals in general. So apparently, as the paper was developed, this idea of the attitudes and experiences was probably the most important part. It may be the part that had the most scientific research. And so there was a need there for an extra sentence to summarize the resolution of the problem. At the end here, it is a 2-sentence long response to the attention getter question, where we talked about what makes the cats appear cuddly and adorable to some while terrifying to others. And we always have the great transition phrase of in conclusion, letting the reader know that you're getting to the end. It reads, in conclusion, the animals themselves are not at fault for either the relaxed feelings or the stressful and fearful moments experienced by those around them. Instead, science shows that the basis of the relationships between humans and cats lies entirely with the humans. So as you can see in the structure, you've come to a conclusion, you've shown what the research has provided in the paper, and you've once again restated your point. And the reader can go away with a informed opinion of whether they agree with your particular point of view or not. So what you've been through is the funnel and reverse structure for your essays. What you're going to want to be doing here in just a moment is you're going to be opening up a second presentation that will talk about the in-text citation, and then you'll take that time after that presentation and you'll begin to structure your opening and closing paragraph. What I would suggest doing would be one of two things. Either go through and make a pages document and open up a list of 1 through 6 or 1 through 7, and then make a sentence by each number, and then you kind of outline it that way. Or you could go ahead and open up the template for your first 6 weeks paper that we created about a week or so ago, and just go ahead and begin working on the first draft of your opening and closing paragraphs. If you decide to do that by opening up the template, remember the first thing you want to do after you open the template is go to File and Save As. Do not save it as a template again, or else you will replace your blank template with whatever you type on that document. So a simple File, Save As before you type anything will get that document ready to go, and you can begin typing on your document for the opening and closing paragraphs.